Hey guys, good morning and happy Friday the 11th. A few things. Hopefully, I'm kind of a little bit better and back on my game today. Thank you to those of you that could kind of read between the lines in my lack of presence the last few days and in my last video. Um, Greatly appreciate that. Um, to those that have kind of reached out to say, hey, you're an ear or say a prayer or whatever, it didn't go unappreciated. Sorry, I don't know what just happened there. I got my phone hooked up to my computer and just rebooted my computer. That's what happened. See, I'm technologically a moron. But those of you that have been with me know that already. So I did want to talk about a few things today, though. And, it was one really cool story because I try to just, I really do try to talk and maybe open some eyes to some things, whether it be a news story or a perception or a thought. Um, and one of the things I read this morning I thought was really cool on a positive note, because there's definitely some negative things to talk about as well, but a young girl who had been, I'm assuming, abducted up in Wisconsin for 3 months was escaped and was found alive. And from one who watches only about 3 TV channels, one of which is that ID channel, you don't really see a whole lot of happy endings to those things. So to see that was really, really, really a great story. So that's fantastic. Unfortunately, I think that when she got abducted, her parents had gotten murdered. So not only does she have to deal with the mental aspect of being abducted, but has to, I guess, process that at the same time too. So that's kind of crazy. Today also, uh, one of the things that's interesting. I've always talked about music and movies as kind of a way is how I can relive your life a little bit. When a movie came out, or when you remember seeing it, or the moment you've seen it. If it's one of those movies you've seen 100 times, those characters kind of become part of your family. And for years, I used to say my favorite movie was Animal House, and one of the characters in that just passed away, Mrs. Dean Wormer, Vera, I forgot her last name, passed away. And it's always as we get older, when you're young. I remember as a kid, my parents, every movie that came on, be the same thing. My mom would sit and say, "What was his name again, Bill?" And they would think and say the actor name. And luckily, I don't find myself doing that as often, but I do find myself kind of, reminiscing. So, Animal House is a movie I've seen at least 100 times. So again, all those characters are kind of a little bit of me, and I'm sure you all have either movies or music or religious passages or something that the people and characters kind of touch you. And so that was kind of a shout out to her for being a part of that great movie. Then I heard on a couple of negatives. I mean, that's not a positive either, but I heard yesterday about a 22-year-old female police officer shot dead in Northern California, and this was a result of a traffic stop. And I heard this on the radio yesterday, and I think it was the second officer. I think there was one in Shreveport, Louisiana, same thing. I don't know the details as to if it was a traffic stop or what, but it got me to thinking about something that took place on my journey. In my first week, it turned out to be one of my more eye-opening days because of people I met in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, some of the things that took place. But the one thing that happened was it was a day I wanted to try to give some varied, not opinion. What am I looking for? What am I looking to say here? Perspective to things. And I was heading into Pittsburgh in a town called, or a section called Wilkinsburg. And about a week earlier, an unarmed African American male had been gunned down by a police officer. And of course, there was protests and riots and things like that. So I wanted to go out and get in the community and try to talk to some people and just get their perspective. And I can talk about all of that, and I have in the book. And I think it's a really one of my better chapters or better stories to tell, because there was so much in that day. But what I want to talk about now was a woman that I offended. And I won't say offended like she hated me, but people, when you have a difference of opinion, sometimes, and I always go back to religion and politics, if you have a different opinion than them, it's almost like they take it personal. If you like Coke versus Pepsi, nobody really cares. You like a Big Mac versus a Whopper, nobody really cares. But you talk about religion and politics, people get pretty irate. Well, as I came to find out, I guess maybe race relations is in that group as well. So what happened is I was talking to a group of people, and this relived this day for me when I heard the story. And one of the things we were talking about was the police force and the neighborhood, the race, the relationship between the residents and the police force. And if I go long today, it's okay. I'll just deal with it. I may go long because there's a few things I wanted to talk about, but I have a terrific appreciation for police officers in this regard. They're not all perfect. They're not all the best. Like anything else, you've got your top group, your bottom group, and your middle group. Same thing with doctors, lawyers, warehouse people, typists, whatever group of folks. But they do a job that I couldn't do. And one of the things that set me off on my journey was kind of being drained by life, by people, right? And we can all sit back and talk about the police and the popo and how they should handle themselves and how they should behave. But first of all, take a breath and think about a group of folks, any group of folks that you know, that from the moment they start their job is dealing with nothing but negativity. All right? Nothing but people lying to them. On the most simple of cases, why were you speeding? People start making up excuses and lying to them. I can't imagine doing that job for more than 3 months without being able to have my whole mental outlook changed. You got to become numb and jaded, and those are on the small scales. And then you get to the bigger stuff, and you're just dealing with people. Again, no one calls 911 and has an ice cream cake waiting for you with candles and says thanks for what you do. It's really a pretty tough position mentally. And then to top that off, they can do and follow procedures and training properly 1,000 times, but if they don't do it one time, it flies out the window. So let me get back to the story, because I think I am going to run long today. So the people, the group, I was basically asking, it was a nice conversation, what their thoughts were about the police force and how this happened, and the story was kind of, we'll get to that. So, as people were pointing the finger and not pointing the thumb, one of the arguments I heard was that the story went like this, as it was explained to me. These group of people, young men, had apparently rented called an Uber, a Lyft, some kind of transportation like that. While the driver was driving them around in the car, the person in the back seat rolled down the window and opened fire at somebody. So of course, call went out to the police, description of the car, etc. 12 minutes later, a police officer spots it, pulls the car over, has the weapon drawn. The person the passenger in the front seat gets out of the car, doesn't freeze or hold or stay or whatever was told, starts to flee. And the officer fires and shoots and kills this young man. Now, I'm not saying that the young man deserved to die. I'm not saying I don't know whether or not the police officer followed proper training protocol or didn't. But what I kind of thought was amazing was the rationale given to me by somebody in this group that said, well, the cop, what an idiot, because the person that did the shooting was in the back seat. The guy that ran out of the car was in the front seat, So I'm asking myself, really, you're not at the original thing. You didn't witness this. You get a phone call. You tell someone to freeze so you can get the information. This person runs. And this person was upset or felt that the cop was in the wrong because he couldn't discern that the person that ran in the front seat was not the shooter from the back seat, because that's what was reported after the fact. All within 12 minutes. And when I asked two simple questions, trying to have a rational conversation with this group of people, and as I said, this one woman was not rational. But I asked this question. I said, here's my question to you. If that young man didn't run, didn't try to flee, would he be dead right now? And if you could just pause and answer that question, the simple answer would be no, he wouldn't be dead, had he just not run and fled the scene. But she couldn't bring herself to answer the question. She had to continue to point the fingers. And then the other question I had asked was this, when I was talking, I said, one of their beefs or one of their arguments for why there's a gap between respect for the police department and the neighborhoods was that 98% of the officers don't come from the neighborhood. They don't know what it's like. They don't know the people. They don't know the streets, etc. So that was their argument. I agree with that. I can't argue that. But my question then, conversely to them, was, can you guys acknowledge that 98% of the people in the neighborhood aren't police officers? In other words, they've never been in that position. This young lady in Northern California went out on a traffic stop. She pulled a vehicle over and went out on a traffic stop and is now dead. Along my journey, there was a day where a couple of young men came out to do a documentary film on me. I was in Oklahoma, and we were along the walk. We would drive to a couple of different places to get different shots. Well, in one place on this rural road, we got pulled over by a police officer. I'm a big guy. I'm in the back seat, and without thinking, any time we'd stop, I'd try to get out and stretch my legs. Well, the police officer had pulled us, and I just got out to stretch my legs, and this officer was very cool. Didn't draw his gun, but had his hand on it and said, don't get out of the car. And then politely afterwards said, hey, please don't ever get out of a car, because they don't know what to expect. Surely I know I'm not a threat, but they don't know that. And then when you want to question them and go, look how trigger happy they are, you hear about a story like this young lady that wanted to, pull somebody over for a moving violation, is now dead. And you wonder, and you look at that way of life. You look at what a police officer goes through day after day after day. And going back to my discussion in Pittsburgh, when I said that to the lady, I said, have you ever had to make a split decision? And if you did, if you were ever in that position to have to make a split decision, time and time again, would you always make the right decision? Again, I'm not trying to justify and say that this is okay. I just try to bring perspective and say, hey, what is, let's be fair. If we're going to point the finger and say the cops don't live here, let's be fair and say you've never been in their shoes to understand what they go through on a daily basis, to tell them what they should do, right? And again, that wasn't received real well. So a couple of other stories that I'm going to try to wrap up. Maybe I'll only get one video today. And so I read about a story about a gentleman. I know people love their animals, and something, dogs. I love my dogs. People really do love their animals. And there's a story of a man in San Diego that was walking on the beach with his wife, and the surf was rough, and his dogs got, just their ankle deep, swept out. He went to go save them, and he did save them, but in doing so, a wave came and pulled him out and slammed him against the rocks, and that man's now deceased. And it just made me think that, what people do for their dogs, when you think about it, it's pretty amazing. This goes out to one specific person who wants to mock my little Italian boy, 13-year-old mustache, and his 17 cats. Maybe he'd try to save his cats, I don't know. But anyway, but that was kind of a sad story, but it just brings how people truly feel about their animals, and how deep that runs. And then lastly, I'll leave you with this, talking about kind of the world of the absurd that I'll never ever know and understand. Jerry Jones is a coach for the Dallas Cowboys, and I just read an article that said that he paid $110 million more for his yacht than he did to purchase the Dallas Cowboys. Now, bear in mind what I just said. Not $110 million for his yacht, $110 million more. I couldn't imagine what that boat can do and how often you would use it and all of that stuff. But again, if you got it, go spend it, Jerry. So Guys, have a great day. I love you. I do have one more really good point, but I'll save it for tomorrow. Have a great day and a good weekend. Take care.